could I pick up on that a little bit more? For example, that you run an airport operation within which there are airport fire engines. There are DHA fire engines, but they are two different types of fire engine, but actually largely they do the same thing. They spray water and foam on things. Why then do we need to go for two different procurement processes rather than trying to have interoperability between the fire engine fleet?
That might be a separate session in itself, Mr. Chairman. The airport fire appliances, properly known as major foam tenders, are specified against a civil aviation code under international civil aviation rules. It has a number, it's very, very long. I'm sorry, I can't recall the exact section now, but it specifies exactly what we need. And those are, for our airport, with our category of fire cover, 6-wheel drive appliances with a response time that's specified. It depends on the size of the aircraft you have landing as to what fire cover you have. We are currently specified to cover Airbus A320 aircraft, but we need to provide for the next generation, which is the 321, which is slightly bigger again. And we have to have 2 available at all times, which is why we have 3 appliances. Those appliances are too large to be driven on the road, so if a much loved house in Port St Mary were afire, then we would not be able to send an airport fire tender to support you without a special exemption, which we did do for Mount Murray to, as you know.
Not a threat, I'm sure. So what you're saying is that they can't be driven on the roads. That's the problem.
The fundamental thing is they need a special permit to be driven on the roads. They are far too large to be a normal roadworthy vehicle. Also, there is one normal appliance that you would recognise as what you might call a fire engine at the airport, and that provides cover for the terminal building. We have, as you know, good working relationships with the Castletown Retain team, and you know they're very closely located. We do support each other. We support each other with some sorts of training. It's a shame, but people consistently think they are the same thing, doing the same thing with the same skill set. They're trained very differently. They're equipped very differently. We provide, the new appliances are very expensive appliances. They are designed to be able to drive up to a burning aircraft, puncture the skin of the aircraft and inject large amounts of foam and to save life. But they are very, very specialised. You remember, I'm sure, the photographs in the film of the Mount Murray fire, where our appliance did turn up under special provision and the foam went the wrong direction at first. Yes, after a bit of readjustment, it did the job. That's not the job it's designed for. Right? It's fine to throw everything in an emergency. So a normal fire appliance cannot generate the amount of foam that we need to cover an aircraft.
Understood. So I think that a better question might be where you have things that may be similar. So that consideration of the ones we need are different. Is that consideration undertaken when you're going to procure anything? Actually, okay, I'm about to go procure something. Do we already do this somewhere else? Is that a question that is already asked
Absolutely.
At the start of the procurement process?
So I've already said to you, we have a relationship in terms of Mercedes dealership. We have a good knowledge and training on Mercedes and Volvo. So you'll see not only our buses being those, but our trucks. You look at the fire appliances; they're Volvos. Okay, there is a Magirus for the ladder. They like to call it an aerial ladder platform now. I think it's an ALP. There are absolute commonalities, and you have paperwork about a new procurement for off-road fire appliances, and one of the difficulties we had with that was that's a vehicle type that we don't generally support, and that's been a challenge for us because there isn't anything else available, so it had to be that. But it was challenging because we try to use the same sorts of things.
Well, interesting. Sorry, just because you mentioned the ALP there and the.
The what? Sorry.
The aerial ladder platform for the fire brigade. I understand that as part of that purchase, there was a 15-year service agreement that was bought with that, capitalised with that, when the department already had the revenue budget for the servicing of the existing kit. So, firstly, I suppose 15 years is a long time to depend on a company still being afloat in this day and age, and secondly, is that really an appropriate response, and is that the appropriate budgetary solution to this?
Well, I'd like to check, Mr. Chairman, because it may be that what's capitalised is the maintenance of the fire specific, not of the drivetrain. So I did follow that appliance the other day. I know it's a Magirus optional and emergency one supply. I cannot tell you what chassis it's on. If it's a Volvo, we're probably doing that. So I think it'd be better if I wrote to your clerk with full details.
The other element of that I had noted down was that just checking the paperwork that you provided us with the Treasury minute, it seems that the Treasury approved £67,500 for this agreement, and it actually cost £71,500. If you could check that as well. But it's just, again, 15 years is a long time for a service agreement when, firstly, the revenue budget already exists within the department, and whether that's...
Again, I'd want to check who it's
that's
with.
That's fine. No.
Our supplier, Magirus, has been trading for decades. Emergency One, probably less so.
Emergency One.
I think it was Emergency One, but they are a new...
It was Emergency One, I've got it here.
Okay.
At what point in your business case do you ensure, obviously you've mentioned the CAA and the regulations and your section, whatever, that you need to make sure the vehicle is appropriate for the airport. At what point in your business case do you make sure your building's appropriate to fit the new engine, because it could be different?
Yes, absolutely. Before you sign the order, you check it fits the garage, is the very simple answer to your question, Ms. Edge. So in the case of these new appliances, they are larger than the current ones because, as I said, they have to meet an increasingly tight specification with more requirements. We will have to do some minor works to move an internal wall, and then the appliances will fit. The department has provided a bid to request a new airport fire station. It's had some major structural work, so it's not an immediate risk of collapse, but it is very much at the end of its life. But we are aware that these are challenging times financially. It's not for me to cast any aspersions or form any judgment about Treasury colleagues. I don't know whether it can be afforded.
The remedial works that need to take place were included in their overall business case, or have you just done that under a revenue?
The works that were taking place included fixing the end wall and the cracks in the roof. That's been done already. That was done before. The work is we will simply do with our own resources. It really is just moving a sort of an internal partition style wall. So yes, we can get that in.
Thanks. I just want to draw a few comments together that we've observed on this afternoon. One was when you were asked earlier on about, I can't remember which colleague said it or asked it, about how many people specifically you've got on procurement. And you made the point that, well, it's a part of their job. So you quite reasonably pointed to the observation that its sort of concept of procurement is inculcated through your department. From another perspective, we were momentarily touching on the NSC issue for the flume farrago, and you then said, no, that's the Department of Education. I just want to ask you what your thoughts would be about the idea of thinking again about the whole process, and maybe removing non-routine procurement, in other words, non-operational procurement, from departments and from your department, and having your department and the others all operational delivering units, and then having a more consolidated professional procurement service which acted in its own right, but then engaged with the operational divisions as and where appropriate. Your thoughts on that line of thinking?
We've gone already significantly down that route. We have the procurement services team that do all our work over 100,000. I've already said how I think they do a good job. The Executive Director of Legal Services, ultimately the head of that team, attends my SMT once a quarter to go through procurement issues, priorities, delays, workloads, learning, and an open discussion of those things. If you want, Mr. Robertshaw, should we take that idea further and say that everything over 50,000, 25,000, 10,000 goes into a centralised procurement process, then I can understand that. I have perhaps one colleague undertaking routine procurement administration in the department and a number doing the contract administrator role under big projects. Where it gets more difficult is what we wouldn't want to do is double the resource available. So if a lot of my colleagues are spending, say, 5 to 10% of their time doing procurement, I won't surrender those staff to a new body, because 95% of their time they're building roads or undertaking an engineering role or another sort of function. And as you'll know, the history of shared services has been one of a great idea, but perhaps not we've not always been able to provide the resource because people do it as part of their job. So I think procurement services is a good system. I've already said that I think there is a case to be made for increased resources if they could be afforded. That's not my judgment to make, but I will not be proverbially or literally throwing them under the bus here. I think they do a good job with the resources they have. They absolutely do, and they do a lot for us.
The reason I particularly asked is one of the comments I got from the private sector. It was as follows: there's an inconsistency in the process and requirements across different government departments. Some tenders are actually well written and thought out, others are terrible.
I think I started, Mr. Robert Shaw, by saying that specification was one area I felt we needed to improve on across the pitch. I'm not going to go at any one colleague or area, but the tender and the specification are the point, aren't they?
But are we asking too much of the departments to become highly competent in this area, as well as being, shall we say, deliverer of education or whatever else?
I
asked my question.
We're back. I understand the question. We're back to a discussion you and I have had in so many forms over so many years. Is it a vertical slice or a horizontal slice?
It's still there, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and there's no right answer. There is something to be said for doing all the procurement in one place and make it brilliant at procurement, and there's something to be said for making procurement part of an everyday job and making it part of operation. They have both got pros and cons, Mr. Robert Shaw, and I suspect you and I will have this discussion yet again in another form, and that's fine, because I don't think there's one...
Yeah.
Maybe neither will I, you never know.
If you're looking to extend a contract, how do you decide whether to go back out to tender for another part of what is ostensibly the same thing, or whether to simply extend the remit? So the example I would give you would be project management of a significant road scheme.
If we were looking to extend a contract where there was an ongoing task that needed to continue, the first check is, did we provide for extension in the original 3-year contract, if I assume a standard 3-year contract? If we provided for a +2, we have the option of activating a +2. We would make that decision based on the performance of the contractor and the continuing need. So if the thing still needed maintaining and the contractor had done a good job, then I think we would be likely to extend. The contractor, or some contracts provide that the contractor has to extend, some give it the choice, but it depends how you drafted the original. If you felt that the contractor hadn't delivered a good response, I think you're almost certainly going to say, well, we need to tender again, we need to start again and get someone different.
And how do you decide how much financial remuneration will be provided against that contract when it's actually a different area that you're now looking at?
Usually we would look to the original contract and see what was provided for in terms of extension. So it may be, for example, that a fixed price was bid for a unit of activity and an RPI or CPI raise was provided at the award. It may be that a new bid is allowed and they can reprice, in which case you assess that as you would have done originally.
And then just finally, if we were to ask you to provide a full list of all the active contracts in DoI at the minute, would you be able to provide that relatively easily?
I would easily be able to do the ones that are through procurement services. All active contracts could include right down to the today somebody is cutting a hedge for us, or today we've asked somebody to do some painting or to...
Well, that's a government order form rather than a contract.
That's an order form. If you want a written contract, yes, we have a contracts register.
Yeah. Great. So we'll ask for that then.
I suspect you don't want every individual form of contract. You want a list of
a list. A list. Okay. Headlines.
And just to follow on from that, talk fire extinguishers. Who actually checks to make sure you've got the product that you spec'd?
In the case of the fire extinguisher contract, we have a team of our own that owns that contract in our estates shared services team, as I suspect you know, Ms. Edge. In the case of healthcare premises, they also have a specialist officer employed by the Department of Health and Social Care who assists with that and does a good job of checking. You might know that contract's recently been terminated.
And I noticed, obviously, in some of the paperwork that we got, that it says that the maintenance has continued, even though that contract's been terminated. I recently visited and had a quick look, and certainly some of the inspections seem to be quite out of date. So, where's the protection for?
We lost time during the time when coronavirus was with us. As you know, our priorities were on things like building hospital capacity, providing oxygen, and my colleagues in that section moved heaven and earth to provide for the needs of our health services, and I'm very proud of what they achieved for us all. We have placed a short-term contract under a formal waiver to take us through the period when we're advertising for a new contract. We have spoken to the regulator and to the fire service, and we're on a risk-based catch-up. So some premises have been caught up with very quickly, others are in less high-risk premises, and I think I don't need to explain, and we are working through it with a new local contractor who is doing their level best to keep up.
Okay, and keeping on the theme of governance, it's been mentioned quite a lot this afternoon. Do you feel you've got adequate resources to make sure the governance and checks and balances and due diligence is carried out?
I think you could ask every accountable officer of every department of government if they'd like more resources, Ms. Edge, and I think they'd all say yes, please. But in the situation we're in, there is value in scrutiny, there is a benefit in scrutiny, but we also have to provide delivery. So I have to use the resources I have to balance that. I think for a lot of these things, the scrutiny ought to be external to make it of proper value, and there we're looking at things like Treasury, Audit and Procurement Services colleagues.
Is it adequate in your opinion?
For the size of contracts you're dealing with?
I think it's proportional to the efforts we apply are proportional to the values of the contracts we're placing. So there's a full-time officer checking on that large scheme as a contract administrator. On some of the small schemes, it will be just a check of was that painted properly.
So do you think the taxpayer's been failed on some of the major schemes?
There's your answer.
Some of the major schemes have not gone as well as we wanted them to go. That's absolutely the case, and we've been through that before in detail. When I look back, were there some things we could have done better? I've already talked about the early contractor involvement on a large scheme. We could have spent more time doing that. That was covered in another committee very recently and discussed openly. I don't think the Hansard's yet available, but that will be recorded for you there, Ms. Edge. So in that case, there is learning we need to do. Will the major schemes that involve most of the island's resource in any one area be challenging? Yes, I think they will. Absolutely they will. We have only so many people and so many skills and so many trades here, and at the moment the industry sector that we work most closely with is very, very busy, and we can find that people are on our site one day and on somebody else's site another day as people try and juggle. We come across, you might remember, Ms. Edge, we struggled to finish the Laxey Bridge on time because the team had been moved to finish the new school, because the same contractor had the new school and the Henry Bloom Noble School. That had to be finished before the end of the school, before the start of the school year, and that took priority. There's an element by which there's only so many people on the island, and I think that goes back to Mr. Hooper's point about £70 million of deliverable capital. Unless we import people, we have to cut our cloth. And you've obviously heard from the industry before about the need to spread the capital programme, the need to make sure it's deliverable, and those are all challenges that we're used to and they've carried with us.
So from a contractual risk and ownership and management point of view, how's that established within the department?
Because I'm the accountable officer, I'm ultimately accountable for all of those things, and in the very largest projects, the internal scrutiny or our project boards, I chair myself. So our biggest project probably at the moment would be the Promenade scheme and the Isle of Man ferry terminal in Liverpool. In both of those I chair the project team myself, and I'm joined by the Minister in both of those, and indeed on the Promenade by many other fine people who form the political steering group. So the scrutiny and governance is definitely there for our biggest projects.
Okay. And you mentioned the Peel Group and negotiations, and that you had to deal with them. Do you feel you have a duty to say if something is beyond your expertise?
Absolutely. Of course, Ms. Edge, yes. So in that case, I was supported by colleagues from the Treasury, from Attorney Generals, colleagues from the Department for Enterprise, and effectively we have to get not the best people there are in DoI, but the best people there are in government, because we're dealing with something on behalf of the community as a whole. That's a high-value land transaction. It's in the UK. It's dealing with a company that is very sophisticated in property management. And the good thing about dealing with the private sector is it's usually about money.
So you mentioned there various departments and people come together to deal with that contract. Was there any point the thought that you should get a professional in to deal with the negotiations with such a large group.
For example, we have used in that scheme, we brought in professional land companies, estate management, contract management, that sort of firm to assist us. So yes, we did bring in, and indeed in one of the schemes that Mr. Robert Shaw mentioned, there was a valuation from an external specialist looking at, we brought in a specialist firm to assess all the bids and actually double check for us and back us up with that expertise. So absolutely, yes, we absolutely do that.
On the contract management side of Isle of Man government, do you feel there's enough expertise within that?
In contract management, where we don't feel we have the expertise, we buy it in. So if we go back against the Isle of Man ferry terminal, the project manager is Turner and Townsend, which is one of the top 5 probably UK project management civil engineering firms. They're an immense firm. The most recent meeting, their regional director joined us, admittedly via the television machine, but they are a hugely sophisticated firm that is assisting us with the delivery. They're also the contract administrator. So we have a project manager who is looking after everything on our side, but we've outsourced project management and contract management to a specialist in the jurisdiction the work's been done. We couldn't, at the moment, we couldn't even go there. I haven't seen that site for ages because of the obvious restrictions. But even though there are restrictions in the UK, our UK appointed agents are delivering there.
Were they there from the get-go?
Yes, absolutely.
From the very get-go?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
They're doing both roles, project and contract management?
Yes, in the UK side, yes.
Okay. Another question that you said earlier, that you could overrule the tender process. How often, how many times does that happen?
In terms of overrule message, let me...
You talked about the quality price mix earlier, and how you could override that if you needed to as a capital officer.
I think I hopefully made clear, Ms. Edge, in my early comments, I do very, very little procurement. In terms of actually writing specifications, I hardly ever do that. In terms of weighing up the costs, the scores, maybe once a year. Very, very rarely do I actively get involved in the nitty-gritty, and I think at the invitation it was clear that you weren't going to be expecting me to be involved in that absolute level of detail.
So you're the only officer that can overrule a tender process?
If the process I operate in my department is for things, if we were to go to Treasury and ask for a waiver to say we want to go 70% quality, that would go in my name and I would support it. So yes, if it's going to Treasury, it'll be done by me or on my behalf.
And you said earlier that that's not very often.
No.
Across government, though, that's over 600 times a year. Admittedly, not all of those will be Department of Infrastructure, but that will be proportionate according to size and...
I suspect so.
Yeah. So that's not very often. There's a proportion of 600 odd.
Out of how many?
It's 600 is the total amount that Treasury deals with in a year in terms of exemptions and waivers.
Yes, and they're not all about quality, are they? Those ones? Are those all about the quality?
No, but these are just... presumably they'll have to cross your desk before they get to Treasury.
Yes, they do. Yeah, but those could be waivers on only one actionable bid. They could be... There's on the particular issue Ms Edge was asking about, the quality price one, I think that's quite rare, but you'd have to ask Treasury how often that was done across government. They will do it, don't get me wrong, but you have to ask them.
Okay.